What is up, dudes? Lady dudes, welcome back to Just Nuts. Guys, today I'm doing kind of a different video. I know a lot of my videos are different. I'm all over the place these days, but today we are going over two archetypes that came over to the TCG pretty much at the same exact time, and there was a lot of argument slash conversation about which one of these decks would be better when they came out. Neither of them ended up being as meta as people thought, but I think they're both decent rogue strategies, and they definitely will get better pretty soon, just because they both got a trap card released or announced, I guess, less than a week ago, as well as Magical Musketeers getting their Link 1 monster about a month ago. And I think they were very close in terms of power before this, but I think there are some key differences here. They do actually do some pretty similar things, but key differences really is what sets them apart. And yeah, I just want to talk about both of them and where they kind of stand after this new support, how much better they get. But if you don't know, Magical Musketeers, just as a brief overview, your Musketeers let you activate your spell and trap musket cards straight from your hand without setting them. So like the trap cards you can activate turn 1. They have some pretty powerful like negate and destroy and banish from grave effects, that kind of stuff. And then all the Musketeers gain an additional effect to either search or special or add from graveyard or draw cards when any spell or trap is activated in their column. All these cards are hard ones per turns, but you pretty much just use all the muskets as hand traps. You try and just set up a board. Sometimes your board is just one musketeer on board, and you have like 3 or 4 muskets in hand, and they're just hand traps. You have a free pop, you have a negate a spell or trap, you have a negate a monster effect. Like, you just have a bunch of hand traps in hand like every turn, and it's pretty tough for some decks to play through. And then as far as weather painters go, your canvases will give their continuous spell or traps, and they give effects to the painters themselves, to the monsters, based on where they sit. So they set up a T formation. So you'll have like 1, and then whatever monster is right above that column, and then right to the left and the right. So it makes a little T formation, and any weather painter that's in one of those 3 zones will gain that effect. And they're all quick effects. You banish them for cost, the Musketeer itself, to gain some effect. And like, you can banish 1 to search, banish 1 to cut opponent's monster in half, banish 1 to bounce an opponent's monster, banish 1 to bounce a spell or trap. They're not as powerful as the muskets. That's one thing I will say. The effects of the canvases are not as powerful. Maybe the bounce is a pretty good effect, because I don't think it's once per turn, and as long as you just keep banishing, bouncing, banish, bouncing, that one can be really, really dangerous. The main thing, though, is that all the weather painters say when they're banished by a weather card, they will be special summoned back to the field on their next standby phase. And so this is like a ramp deck, pretty much, where you normal summon, you banish it so that it never dies. Like, your monsters almost never die because they banish for cost. So anytime your opponent tries to disrupt your play, you banish your weather painter for cost, and then they dodge. They dodge everything. So they come back, and the next turn you summon again, you summon again, you summon again, and you just keep stockpiling. It's a ramp deck. You start very slow, but then like every turn you got a new monster. You just keep dodging. Your opponent can't get them all at the field, and then eventually you've got 5, 6 weather painters on the field with 4 or 5 canvases as well, and you're just ready for anything. So that's a brief overview of both the decks. Now I want to go over quickly the new cards that are coming out. So the first card let's go over the Musketeers first, right? So let's go over the card that came out about a month ago for Musketeers. It's a Link 1 monster. Also for weather painters, I didn't say this, but I also didn't put, they have a Link 3 monster, and it has 3 arrows downward, and it pretty much says you can banish a weather monster it points to negate any spell trap monster effect or a summon, pretty much. So it's literally a solemn judgment, and if the whole goal of the deck is pretty much to set up that monster, pointing it 2 or 3 weather painters, and then every turn you have 3 negates. And at that point in the duel, like at that late in the duel, no deck can play through 3 negates like that. So that's the whole goal of the deck, is just to set up that kind of situation, and then just shut your opponent down and beat him away. But yeah, so back to Musketeer Max. He is a Link 1 with 1,000 attack. He pretty much says during either player's turn, you can activate your muskets, so it has the same effect, allowing you to use your muskets. But his main effect says when he is link summoned. So on summon, you can get one of these effects. You pick. So you can either add magical musket spell and traps with different names from your deck to the hand up to the number of monsters your opponent controls, or you can straight up special summon musketeer monsters with different names from your deck up to the number of spell or traps your opponent controls. So it depends on the matchup, but either way, you can plus so much off this. Like, think of like a link deck. If you got, well, not you, Link, because you can't summon him, but if your opponent just set up like a board with like 4 Link monsters, you just summon him and you just search 4 muskets, and then you just dismantle your opponent's board. I will say his biggest weakness is he's pretty much at risk of being hit by almost any hand trap. Like, maybe not Ghost Bell, but like Ash, the most common one, Impermanence, the second most common one, like Veiler, I believe Ogre works as well. He's literally fodder for like the 4 most common hand traps in the game, outside of like Ghost Bell. So I will say that, but his ceiling is huge, and one of the biggest problems for the deck prior was going second. You had to normal summon into an opponent's board, and if your opponent could disrupt your normal summon or clear that musketeer off the board, then all the muskets in your hand were dead. And then you can't break a board because you need a musketeer on board to activate your muskets. So that was the biggest problem, is that it's fragile. And it still is kind of fragile, because if he gets hit, with a hand trap, it can still punish you a lot. I mean, actually, it doesn't even punish you that much, because you still have your monster on board. You still have your ability to activate your muskets. But it's just... It depends. It depends on the situation, but he is super, super weak to hand traps. That's his biggest problem, but the ceiling is huge. He's how you win in grind games, is like, you're just in a grind game and your opponent's like, all right, the board's pretty even, but you just link summon him, and if your opponent had 2 monsters, you just search 2 muskets, and you just plus 2 for like no reason. And then you just dismantle their board with the 2 muskets you drew, and they just can't keep up. It's just too much for a lot of decks to just be able to grind against that kind of card. Like, you play 3 of this because some duels you're just going to summon him every turn and just plus immensely every turn. And if you're playing against a back row deck, you can just special, 2, 3, 4 magical musketeers straight from the deck, and then you have a strong link play. Go into Borrelsword, OTK. Like, the deck can do some pretty wild things. And then for the other Magical Musket card is Magical Musket Bloody Crown. This got announced less than a week ago. Pretty much just says, it's actually continuous. None of the other ones are continuous, but this one is, which is interesting. You can only control 1, and during your main phase, you can special summon a Magical Musket straight from your hand, and if you do, if your opponent's monster zone is unused currently, like main monster zone is unused when you summon, that zone cannot be used this turn. It's nothing crazy, but there are certain decks that do link plays that are like kind of limited. So like if they're doing a nightmare play, sometimes they'll summon something pointing down to go into like a Cerberus or a Phoenix underneath of it, and you can just special to kind of disrupt that, to kind of lock down that zone, so they can pretty much, they have to like do like a really awkward play. It's never really going to shut down your opponent immensely, but it can force them to play kind of awkwardly and suboptimally than how they would have prior. So it is nice. It's mostly, the special is mainly what you're looking for, but that, depending on where you put them, can come in handy in certain situations. So this is just nice for, you're probably playing like around 9, 10, 11 Musketeers, and sometimes they clog your hand. So this card can be really nice to just help, get them out as fast as possible, and just every turn. Either player's turn. So, like, yeah, you could just keep searching off of Caspar to special, to get them to your hand, and then just use this to keep tutoring them out, and you can just keep pumping out more Musketeers. I don't think this card you play that many of. I think maybe you play 1, maybe 2. I don't think it's a 3 of. 3 just seems like too many, for sure. This card would definitely clog. So 1, maybe 2. But yeah, I think it's a solid card. I think Max is much more helpful to the deck than that. But yeah. And then we're going to move to our weather card here, which is the rainbowy canvas. So we have one more canvas to match the Link monster in the extra deck, and this card is pretty good. You can only control 1, and then its second effect says it gives, it says that it gives the monsters in the T zone, above it and to the right and the left. monster zones this effect. It says if your opponent controls a monster, so your opponent does need to control a monster. Quick effect: banish your weather painter to special summon a weather monster with a different name from it straight from the deck. But you cannot special summon straight from the deck for the rest of the turn. Not a big deal. This is the only card in the archetype that's special straight from the deck. So no worries there. But this is so incredibly strong. It's a trap card, so you got to set it for a turn anyway. And your opponent's going to summon a monster on their turn. Like, you got to assume they're going to summon a monster. And you just get a special every turn, an extra. So, like, you think of it like, oh, but you're losing a monster, get a monster. Not really, because the monster you banished to activate this is getting itself back. So really, this is a +1. It's a slow-ish +1, but the deck is already so slow, it's all about resources. And this card almost like doubles the speed of the deck, because you're just getting an extra monster every turn. Literally every turn. Not just your opponent's turn, but like pretty much as soon as this card is live, you're going to start special summoning another weather painter every turn. And instead of this deck taking 4 or 5 turns to get to that win condition and set up, the rainbow link monster, now you can kind of do it with this card. You can kind of do it in the 3 turns. It doesn't necessarily cut it in half, but I think it's more like 40%, just because that first turn you don't get the special. So that's not, if you go first, you can't do the special, but you do want to get this set as fast as possible. But this card is just really, really important, because that was the problem with the deck, is that it's a ramp deck, but it's a slow ramp deck. Like, that ramp is really, you know what I mean? It's really slow ramp, but this like almost doubles the angle that you're going to ramp up. That it still is going to start a little slow, but it's going to ramp so much faster, and you're just going to flood the monsters out. And this card is the whole reason why I even put this one, the level 6 Aurora, on here, because normally I wouldn't advise playing Aurora in a more competitive build, but because of this card, its specials are straight from the deck, and then she protects all your weather canvases. She pretty much says none of them can be targeted or destroyed by card effects while she's on the field, and she's just 2200 beat sticks. So also all the other painters are not that big, the next biggest one being 17, so that body can be pretty important for making it tough for your opponent to deal with you during the battle phase. And just that protection effect can be really important, because a lot of decks main deck Twin Twisters, or want to side Twin Twisters in, and now it's a dead draw if she's on the field. So yeah, I think she's a niche card, and she's pretty nice to have. Maybe it's just a one of, if you need to bring her out because you're worried about your canvases being torn down, you pull her out of the deck and then she protects you. But yeah, I think this card is overall better for weather painters than either Max or Bloody Crown are, but maybe Bloody Crown and Max together give the same level of support to them. I thought, like, oh, what if weather painters got like a link one? And they could, but if you take a weather painter out of the main monster zone, you don't have your fodder to banish for your thing. So maybe that would nerf it. Is that, like, you got to decide, like, if you banish or if you link away, you don't have a weather painter to banish with your canvases, and then your canvases can't be activated. Or so it kind of mitigates it. Or maybe the link monster is good, but when you have a boss monster like the monster that can just negate 3 cards in a turn, you have to be careful with how fast you make that deck. And this deck is now almost twice as fast, but we'll see if a link monster would even change that. I mean, Musketeers didn't have a link monster in general, so maybe this is just them saying, all right, now you both have a link monster, you're good. And that's fine with me. I'm totally cool with that. I love both of these decks. One of the main differences for the decks is that Musketeers have so much disruption, and weather painters don't really have much disruption. Their disruption comes in the form of, you can quick effect bounce a back row, doesn't even destroy it, which is tough. If that destroyed it, that card would actually be decent. During the battle phase, you bounce, which is not really like a good disruption. It's good for taking down boards, but it's going to be face up, so your opponent's not going to attack into it usually. And then Auroral Canvas says if your opponent adds a card, you can like banish that card, but they get to redraw. So they're not minusing, but they do have you have a chance to disrupt like their hand, so they don't have what they want. They don't just get to search what they want. They do have to like draw random, and it may not be something good. You know what I mean? It's all like meh. Whereas the Musketeers straight up have like negate a spell and trap and destroy it, negate a monster effect and make its stats 0, destroy a card, banish cards from your opponent's graveyard. Like, the disruptions for Magical Musketeers are so much stronger, but they're also so much more fragile, because if any of your Musketeers, if you have no Musketeers on the field, all the muskets in your hand are useless, completely useless. So if you get Kaiju'd, if your one Musketeer gets Kaiju'd, you can't activate any of the muskets in response to that, and then you just don't have a Musketeer, so all the cards in your hand are dead. See what I mean? And then on the opposite note, Weather Painters are much more durable because they banish themselves. They dodge. All the monsters dodge everything pretty much. So, like, your opponent can't get rid of them. They have to kind of, like, work around them. They have to, like, force you to banish your monsters and then attack through once you've banished everything, and they've forced that. So OTK decks can be a problem. Really fast decks can be a problem for Weather Painters because they're so slow. They both have weaknesses, but they also both have some pretty good strengths, and I think both these decks get a lot better with this new support. And yeah, I don't know which one is better, honestly. I want to say Musketeers, just because Weather Painters don't have the built-in disruptions. You have to just kind of play hand traps, just because. Otherwise, you may not have any disruptions for your opponent in any given duel. Whereas Musketeers can have, 4 or 5, not just hand traps, but powerful hand traps, negates and destruction hand traps. And yeah, it's a little more fragile, but sometimes you just got to do, every deck has a weakness. So, but yeah, let me know what you guys think. Which one of these are you more looking forward to? Because I'm looking forward to both a lot. Probably, I don't know. They're both control-based decks. I love control-based decks, and I don't even know which one I like more. I'd have to decide. I'd have to get back to you on that one. So guys, I know this video got a little long here, but if you enjoyed it, let me know. Subscribe to the channel if you have not yet. Much appreciated on that end. And yeah, guys, I'm going to get the hell out of here before I talk any much longer. I love these decks. Hopefully you do too. Hopefully you're pumped about the new support and what it does for the deck, because I think both of these are rogue. I think they can compete legitimately. So I'm just a fool, though. What do I know? Peace out, guys.